Good evening to you. For Telesur, I'm Regan Veens in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin with this evening's headlines. Colombia's AG challenges the constitutional court ruling that gay couples can have kids. The Congress has approved the bill. The Bolivian people will decide if President Morales can run once more for office. And as tensions seemingly de-escalate in Jerusalem, Israel recalls 300 police officers. The details on these stories and more now on From the South. Thank you for being here with us. We begin with Colombia's Attorney General, who has announced that he will be challenging Wednesday's decision to grant adoption rights to same-sex couples. With 6 votes to 2, the Constitutional Court in Bogota overturned a previous ruling that only allowed gay couples to adopt once one of the partners was the biological parent. Colombian laws are slowly expanding the rights for homosexuals. Back in 2007, the Constitutional Court recognized de facto couples, but the Congress rejected a proposal in 2013 to fully legalize gay marriage.
So, to impede a child from having a family based only on sexual orientation or the gender of a person or of a couple represents an unacceptable restriction on the rights of the child and, furthermore, contrary to the superior interest of the minor.
On another subject, the Colombian government and the FARC guerrillas continue discussions for long-term solutions to ensure that any peace agreement will be permanent. Representatives of the rebel group at the peace talks in Cuba are proposing a fund which will help provide solutions for social issues that have fueled the conflict and that continue to affect Colombia. As the FARC spokesperson explained, the fund will help implement the National Peace Plan.
The fund will be created with the constitutional framework and it will have a 10-year duration. The amount of the resources allocated to the fund will be defined as a portion of Colombia's GDP through a legal framework that would be created with special account with the national budget in order to finance projects and goals defined through the National Peace Plan.
The FARC spokesperson Luis Carvajal also explained how the size of this fund would be decided.
To define the annual amount of the fund, an estimate will be made of the economic impact of peace, both its costs and benefits. In particular, account will be taken of the investment needs for the project included in the National Peace Building Plan. If any event, the total amount should not be less than 4% of the country's GDP, and this amount will not be subject to fiscal adjustments or cuts.
And that was Lucas Carvajal. Now moving on, just days ahead of the 30th anniversary of what is known in Colombian history as the Palace of Justice siege, relatives of those who were forcibly disappeared continue denouncing the impunity surrounding the cases. Our correspondent Natalia Margarita has more on this. She filed this report.
On November 1985, 11 people were taken alive by the Colombian military out of the Justice Palace right in the side of the street and straight into this historic museum right on the other side of the street. And even though they made it inside that building alive, they were never returned to their families. Among those who have been tirelessly seeking for their relatives is Pilar, who was left alone with her 4 daughters after her husband, a waiter at the Palace of Justice, was forcibly disappeared.
I never really had to tell my daughters what happened, or who their father was, and how much he loved them. They still remember his affection, and in regard to his disappearance, they have simply grown up seeing my struggle to find him.
30 years after the Palace of Justice was violently raided by the military in an attempt to retake it from the now-gone M19 guerrillas, lawmakers have denounced the failure of the Colombian justice to clarify the truth on what happened to those who disappeared during the events.
In a context in which the justice system has been settled up for impunity, it becomes even more understandable that a crime such as the forced disappearance has faced enormous difficulty.
The impunity goes beyond the Palace of Justice cases and further into the estimated 45,000 forcibly disappeared in Colombia. Among them is Maria Cristina, disappeared by paramilitaries 11 years ago, and whose mother Paulina has had to become herself the investigator of the case.
There has never been a political willingness from the state. We, the victims of forced disappearances, have turned into the investigators ourselves. We have to go to the prosecutors already with the investigation, telling them where our relatives are and what happened to them.
The Inter-American Court of Human Rights has already convicted the Colombian state for the Palace of Justice disappearances. Now the relatives hope the country's justice system finally establishes responsibilities and returns the bodies to their families. Natalia Margarita, Telesur, Bogotá.
Breaking news now, Haitian authorities have released the results of October 25th's first elections. Ruling party candidate Jovenel Moise and former government executive Jude Celestin will face each other in a runoff on December 27th. 37-year-old Moise, owner of a banana exporting business, garnered 32% of the votes, while Swiss-educated mechanical engineer Celestin, he's 53 years old, he got 25% of the votes. The Bolivian Congress has approved the bill for a referendum to determine whether the constitution can be modified to allow President Evo Morales to run for a fourth consecutive term. Now, this amendment was demanded by several social movements who want the continuity of the country's first indigenous president. Under his rule, Bolivia has enjoyed relative prosperity and calm, and its economy has tripled in size. If the referendum turns out positive, Morales said he would run for a fourth term in the 2019 elections. This would allow him to be in office in 2025, when Bolivia commemorates its independence's bicentennial. The United States has deported nearly 26,000 Guatemalan refugees in the first 10 months of the year. Although this is 42% less than last year, this is because Mexico has been playing a greater role by deporting Central American migrants before they reach the border with the United States. Mexico's deportation of Guatemalan, Salvadoran, and Honduran migrants increased 79% in the first 4 months of 2015 compared to the same period last year. And between 2013 and 2014, Mexico's detention of migrants. The president of the Venezuelan National Assembly has revealed new evidence of links between the U.S. government and destabilization plans by the right-wing opposition. Some of the evidence includes the recent meetings between right-wing opposition leaders with top diplomats of the U.S. Embassy, including the representative of the Department of Political Affairs, Rita Buck, and the Charge d'Affaires, Lee McClenny.
Rita Buck Rico from the U.S. Embassy was conspiring against our country, meeting with opposition sectors at the Central University. Now I would ask the people from the embassy, and I'm sure they will take off my sponsorship, but I have to ask, what is that lady doing there? What are the discussions at the Central University for that lady to be there?
The Mexican Supreme Court's decision declaring that prohibiting people from cultivating marijuana for personal use was unconstitutional and will lead to more debate over the issue of legalization. This is according to President Enrique Peña Nieto, who already last year hinted that he would adopt a more liberal stance on marijuana in line with other countries' policies, including its northern neighbor, the United States. Proponents of the reform argue that criminalizing drugs has only raised their street value and put unnecessary strain on the penal system by filling prisons with low-level dealers or people caught with small amounts.
The government respects the definitions of the Supreme Court of the nation, and particularly on this issue. I am also clear that this position opens a wide debate for eventually discussing a regulation on the issue of consumption of marijuana.
Many have declared the Supreme Court decision as historic, setting a precedent and opening the doors to a potential full legalization of the recreational use of marijuana. Now, it is important to note that the court only declared that it was unconstitutional, the absolute prohibition of marijuana, only for 4 plaintiffs who are members of the Mexican Society for Responsible and Tolerant Personal Use, or SMART in its Spanish initials. Now, they were granted the ability to cultivate and consume for personal use marijuana. It is worth noting that the 4 members of SMART have publicly stated that they are not interested in the private consumption or use of cannabis, but rather sought the court ruling as a way to open the door for future general legalization. Meanwhile, in response to the court's ruling, Mexico's President Enrique Peña Nieto declared that the recreational use of the substance is still illegal and that combating its usage will continue. Now, Mexico maintains very conservative anti-drug laws that criminalizes at least 14,500 people for the trafficking or consumption of the substances. Many pro-legalization's proponents point to Mexico's staggering violence of more than 100,000 dead and 26,000 disappeared since 2006 as a result of prohibition policies and the so-called war on drugs. This is Clayton Khan reporting for Telesur here in Mexico City.
The Universal Child Allowance is a social benefit that the Argentine state grants to the unemployed, to cash-in-hand workers, and to those who earn less than the minimum living age and are parenting children under the age of 18. It was introduced by the Front for Victory government of Cristina Fernandez 6 years ago and remains a cornerstone policy of the governing party. Mauricio Macri of the right-wing Let's Change coalition was once a staunch proponent of the measure but has changed his stance, now promising that he will keep it without commenting on how he plans to fund it. Here is Telesur's Leo Pobletti-Coduti with more from Buenos Aires.
Argentina's Universal Child Allowance is a social insurance benefit that will surely go down in this country's history as one of the greatest legacies of the governing Front for Victory coalition. It has changed the lives of millions, including Soraida's.
We used to live off my husband's income. Now we have the Universal Child Allowance, which helps and complements our household's finance and helps my daughter.
More than 3.5 million children have the safety net of the Universal Child Allowance under them, which has, in most cases, ensured them a healthy, balanced diet for the first time ever.
The benefit is for the kids. It does not belong to mom or dad. It's there to buy the kids fresh fruit and vegetables or some meat. It helps. We are really grateful that this government distributes the wealth instead of putting it into their pockets as those who governed before them did.
The Universal Child Allowance is funded by taxes applied to soybean exports, which right-wing presidential candidate Mauricio Macri of the Cambiemos coalition has promised to abolish if he is elected. On the other hand, Macri has promised that he will not scrap the Universal Child Allowance, but has not said how he plans to fund it. And many here in Argentina fear it is an electoral promise he will break if he becomes president. I asked Zoraida how would losing the benefit affect her family.
It would affect my children directly and me as a mother, because to see my child go without the basic items I mentioned before, as a mother, that would be very hurtful. I would feel helpless.
Macri's coalition was only until recently a fierce critic of the Universal Child Allowance, promising to abolish it if voted into the presidency. Mauricio Macri and the right-wing pro-party he leads backflipped on this policy right at the start of the presidential race when it realised that terminating the Universal Child Allowance would scare away millions of voters, including Zoraida, who were not prepared to put this country's social achievements over the past decade at risk. Leo Pobletti-Coduti, Telesur, Buenos Aires.
Different indigenous groups have been protesting outside the Brazilian Congress against a proposed constitutional amendment that would change the way their ancestral lands are demarcated. Now, the protesters went to Congress to demand that the speakers of the Senate and the lower house take account of their interests and the impact of any change on their communities. The new measure would give Congress the power to approve the boundaries of indigenous reserves in place of the Indigenous Foundation, FUNAI. Last week, a committee of the lower house approved the amendment, which would remove the protection given to indigenous lands. The original protection was introduced after the end of the military dictatorship in the 1988 Constitution. Indigenous people and their supporters say the change, known as PEC 215, would give even more power to cattle ranchers, big soy farmers and other agri-businesses to block the demarcation of their ancestral lands. Land-owning interests are a powerful lobby in the Brazilian Congress. And on Wednesday, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development said that Brazil should do more to fight climate change. This Thursday, it was the musician Gilberto Gil who said that even though the country is a leader in the climate change field, it needs to do more to battle deforestation. He said this at the closing of Rio Climate Week, less than a month to the COP21 conference, which will take place in Paris. And coming up after the break, Israel is making the call to recall 300 officers who were employed to deal with the Palestinians. But will this help to de-escalate the tensions? A special report by Noor Harazin next.
The truth behind the power. We lift the lid on some of the world's most ruthless figures. Open file. Only on telesurtv.net in English. Wherever the news, you'll be there. An insight into Africa today. With Bill Fletcher. The Global African. Only on telesurtv.net in English. Wherever the news, you'll be there. We need to understand the world we live in. We require news with critical points of view, thorough analysis and social commitment. This information is vital to think, to understand and to change. The world demands a new perspective. telesurtv.net/English. Wherever the news, you'll be there.
Rescue teams are working diligently to pull survivors out from under the rubble of a collapsed factory in Lahore, Pakistan. Thus far, 99 people have been pulled out alive. Now, some are linking the factory's collapse to the recent 7.5 earthquake that shook the country just over a week ago. Authorities have been found dead. Rescue efforts are ongoing. On the Greek island of Lesbos, thousands of refugees still arrive daily, hungry, dehydrated, yet hopeful. They express hope of finding new and better lives as their trip is an escape from war, persecution or poverty. However, volunteers on the island say they're exhausted. They work round the clock and claim that larger aid and international organizations have not been pulling their weight, creating great challenges to tending to the thousands. In the past month, 80 refugees. The body of a 4-year-old Bosnian refugee was laid to rest this week. His body had been found in the car trunk of a German man who had kidnapped and sexually abused him. Now the man has admitted to killing yet another child, a 6-year-old German boy who had done soon to confirm the identity of the body. Meanwhile, international aid organizations are blaming the crisis on a lack of European solidarity. The UN's refugee agency said the region needed to follow Germany's open border policy example, as well as its financial pledges.
I would describe the state of the European response as being disappointing in terms of the divisions that it has exposed between those who are prepared to take a responsibility in respect of refugees and those who have not.
European Commissioner for Economic and Financial Affairs, Pierre Moscovici, said that there will be a small but positive impact on the economy from the 3 million refugees estimated to arrive in the region by the year 2017.
There will be an impact of growth from the arrival of refugees that is weak but positive for the EU as a whole, and that will increase the GDP by 0.2 to 0.3% by 2017.
Israel is to withdraw 300 border police reservists as a relative calm has returned to occupied Jerusalem. Our correspondent Noor Harazin reports.
The Israeli occupation forces have decided to demobilize 300 police officers who were called up in October. The announcement came as occupied Jerusalem saw a marked reduction in clashes and violence over the past 24 hours. The Israeli Knesset's Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee had approved last month a proposal by Defense Minister Moshe Yaalon to call up 1,400 police officers. They were to be deployed on the borders and also in mixed cities inside the 1948 occupied territories where Arabs and Jews live side by side.
I expect Jerusalem's uprising to continue even if the situation has calmed down for a while. A bigger revolution is expected, and it will be the beginning of the end. This is how we can achieve liberation. Nobody cares about us in the whole world, so we should take care of ourselves.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu approved the deployment of the battalions in Jaffa, Haifa, Al-Ramle and Lod in an effort to quell the demonstrations by angry Palestinians against Israel, as well as the incitement by Israeli rights groups against Arabs. According to the Israeli army officials, the move was needed at the time in Jerusalem following a violent wave of stabbing attacks against Israeli occupation forces. Noor Harazin, Telesu TV, Gaza.
The U.S. State Department will continue their review of the Keystone XL pipeline, dismissing a petition by TransCanada to pause this review. This declaration is a small victory for activists who hope to halt this project completely. Bianca Perez has the details.
We are here today because we recognize the damage to our planet that is coming from global warming.
Due to the large percentage of greenhouse emissions caused by the oil, gas, and coal industries, a new bill was introduced in the Senate which hopes to halt the extraction of these fossil fuels. The bill would keep over 90% of the potential carbon emissions from these industries underground forever.
The scientists tell us that we have to leave most of the coal and oil and gas that we know about underground, that if we burn it, it will simply overwhelm the planet.
If we must.
Proponents of this bill, which include aspiring presidential candidate Bernie Sanders, as well as supporters, hope that it will put pressure on the Obama administration to make a definitive decision and put an end once and for all to the Keystone XL pipeline, which would have the ability to transport more than 800,000 barrels of oil daily from Canada to the U.S.
I would hope very much that President Obama will stand up as soon as possible and say that the Keystone pipeline is a no-brainer, that you do not extract and transport some of the dirtiest fuel on earth. End of discussion. No to the Keystone pipeline.
The Keystone pipeline would affect 740 water systems, would cause damage to more than 1,170 miles of land and forest areas, would have a high impact on global warming, and would increase the risk of possible spills, which would cause irreversible damage to the communities nearby.
Keystone XL is set to go through the Ogallala Aquifer, drinking water for the people in that area. And so when that pipeline leaks, which it will, that is going to directly impact those communities. They won't have clean drinking water anymore.
President Obama has declared that he would make a decision on this project before his presidential term ends.
This conversation is about urging
environmentalists hope that he will take a stand soon and begin a shift towards sustainable energy. Bianca Perez, Telesur, Washington, D.C.
This is our actual survival.
The Rolling Stones, the rock band, will be touring Latin America for the first time in 10 years. They will perform in Peru, Colombia and Uruguay for the first time. They will also play in Chile, Brazil and Mexico. Although there was no mention of new music during the announcement of the tour, the band's guitarist Keith Richards said earlier this year that they plan on recording new material during the tour. If it does happen, it would be their first album of new material since the year 2005. And finally this evening, the geishas of Japan are seen as the guardians of the country's ancient culture and are famous around the world. But little is understood about the iconic character, even in Japan. Geishas are taught traditional arts from the age of 15, and it takes around 5 years to become a fully fledged geisha. It is their duty to protect Japanese customs and culture, which are dying out, and to continue those traditions. That's it from us this evening. Remember, you can join us on Twitter and on Facebook. And for more on these and other stories that you've heard tonight, you can visit our website at telesurtv.net/English. For more news teams in Quito, Ecuador, and right here in Caracas, Venezuela, my name is Reagan Devines. Have a great evening. We'll see you tomorrow.